Now from Pint and Plow, it's Voice of Hope Global with Jacqueline Gerasimides, your host, as we continue our conversation with MHDD. And here now is Jacqueline Gerasimides.
Morning again to Voice of Hope Global broadcast this morning. It is Friday at 10 a.m. We are delighted to see all of you wonderful people that are here listening. Don't forget to like and share this broadcast with people that you know who really need to listen to this. Remember that we are bringing real life topics out into the light. Subjects that are difficult to talk about, but we're bringing them out in the light always with compassion and care and understanding, where shame and guilt do not have a platform. So today we're going to be talking about several subjects. We'll start with the first one, and that is trauma. What is trauma? And before we get into that, let's go around and introduce yourselves, please, because the audience doesn't know you as well as I do. I am blessed to know you.
Well, my name is Amy Anderson. I am one of the training specialists for Hill Country MHDD. I am the director of our mental health first aid program. We cover 19 counties and almost 24,000 miles. Kate's not here today, but a big shout out to her.
Yes.
She's been doing a lot of traveling, and thank you so much for having us back.
Yes, you're welcome.
I am glad to be back also.
Yes.
So my name is Jason Johnson. I'm a contract trainer for multiple mental health related topics, suicide intervention, and RAT.
Yes, and I thank you, Jason, for being back. I know you were a key part of our show last week, and just really thank you for your openness and your honesty. You know, people out there really need to know about our lives. They need to know because our testimony is very, very powerful, and pain has a platform. That's a whole nother subject.
Right.
But pain does have a platform. And if we have gone through certain situations in our life where we have experienced great pain, and when a door opens, a supernatural door opens for us to express how we overcame that situation, we should go ahead and do it at all times.
Absolutely.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Teresa Gonzalez, and I, too, am with Hill Country Mental Health and Developmental Disabilities. I am a training specialist, and our primary program is mental health first aid, and we're just so grateful that we must like us a little bit because we keep getting invited, so thank you for that.
Well, I think that the subject that we talk about is so important. And in fact, we are going to open up for those that are listening. If they have any questions, they can put up in the comments, and we'll get those questions hopefully towards the end of the show. We'll have a little bit of time designated to answer some of the questions and concerns as you listen to the broadcast, and some of the things that you may have answered actually as we go along. But if not, we're welcome to hear and to answer some of those questions. So let's start off with trauma. All of us, every single person on this planet has experienced trauma in some ways. We
Absolutely.
cannot get away from it. We all have had it, some more than others, but I have a little definition of that. It says it's an emotional response to a distressing experience that you feel, whereby you have no control over it, and it honestly undermines your safety. Can you think about situations whereby people experience trauma?
Absolutely, and I want to add on to that definition because honestly, two people can be in the same traumatic environment, but it's actually, if I could add on to that definition, it's how the person perceives that in their life.
Yes.
So, Jacqueline, you and I could be in the same car accident, just giving an example, and both of us, thank goodness, we walked away with a few bumps and bruises. You, by the end of the day, you were ready to get back in another car and go off driving. Not me.
Right.
You know, make-believe world, you came over and said, Amy, let's go to the mall. And I said, there's no way I can't even get in the passenger seat.
Right.
So trauma, again, to you was not a big deal, even though it was a traumatic experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
But to me, I may need assistance, right? And we usually say if you are feeling that, whether it's jumpy, whether, you know, you're just not able to, I like to say, you live, you laugh, and you love, right? For 4 weeks or more, it's okay to reach out and get assistance for what you're going through.
Yes.
We want you to come forward and get help.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that the whole thing about what happens in trauma is that we don't really have control over it.
Mm-hmm.
Things happen to us, and we're completely taken in shock. Oh, I wasn't expecting this, and I wasn't prepared for this, and I don't know how to deal with this. And we feel completely out of control. We feel vulnerable, and we feel unsafe.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, to tag on to what Amy was saying, everybody experiences trauma differently.
Yeah.
And so it's, I had learned just through my own personal experience, judging myself and beating myself up for how I was responding to those situations. It didn't help, right? It just prolonged my recovery from those experiences. And so just giving yourself a break, right? And saying, you know, this is just, it really is the brain's way of responding, like you said, to really the adverse situations. And so they're typical, they're normal responses, but everybody responds differently. And
They
so
do.
it's not a matter of strength or character or anything
No.
like that, you know. So please, you know, give yourself a break if that's something that you're experiencing.
Yeah.
And just, you know, hopefully find someone that you can talk to about it.
I think that's a very big key right there. Don't you think so, Teresa?
Absolutely. The other thing about trauma is sometimes it isn't one event. It's cumulative. It's a series of events, a certain environment. You know, maybe they didn't experience a car accident or something that I guess the world might perceive as being a traumatic event. But if they've experienced things like chronic poverty, being unhoused, having food insecurity, experiencing toxic stress like domestic violence, emotional abuse, verbal abuse, all of those things, they have a cumulative effect that eventually cause a person to have trauma responses.
You know, domestic violence, you mentioned that is very good, because I remember living in Colorado, and a specific county that I used to live in, it had one of the highest rates of domestic violence. And that is just something that just comes out of the blue, and you're not expecting it. And family after family, house after house, I remember seeing police cars and hearing the stories, and that's a very big one, the whole domestic violence, and it's growing.
It's generational. They're you know, it's not impossible to break from these cycles, but people who unfortunately have experienced those situations, unfortunately, maybe they don't go on to be perpetrators, but maybe their children do.
Right.
And it's just this cycle that continues. And
Yeah.
hopefully by these discussions we can break those cycles.
Yeah. What would you say, Amy? How is a good way that someone that's experienced their father beating their mom, for example, and they're watching this and they feel completely hopeless and out of control, and they can't help, but they're just watching this, and they grow up. And like you said, Teresa, sometimes they become the perpetrator, and other times they just become what they feel like the victim of.
Well, we have so many, and that can become, what she's talking about is layers of trauma, right? But we also know there's so many risk factors. If in one of our books, our mental health first aid book, there is just the one paragraph underneath trauma. It basically, if you read that, you would sit back and go, this is happening all over the world. But we like to say, if I can give you an example of a teeter-totter, right? We have a lot of, you know where I'm going with this, right? If you have a lot of trauma in your life. And by the way, just because you have trauma in your life does not mean that you're going to have a mental health disorder. All
And
right?
that is really important
Yes.
for the listeners to hear that.
Absolutely.
So those who have experienced it, like you said, doesn't mean that they are going to become the victim of
Yes.
that
Yes.
particular
Yes.
traumatic situation and then go on to model it later on.
Correct. And that's where Teresa was giving you lots and lots of risk factors, right,
Right.
in people's life. But if I can teeter-totter, what we want to counter that with and tip the scales with are protective factors. So I want you to just think about, and maybe some of you just shout out, what are some of those protective factors that, Teresa, start with you. What do we need in our life to overcome trauma in our life?
We need community support, friends.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. What else, Jason?
Finding just one adult that you feel safe with, that you can talk to, makes such a huge.
Jason's talking about for our youth. The number one protective factor for our youth is having one, again, as he said, trusted adult that they can connect with. Did I say, Jason, a parent? Even though I'm a mother of 3, I would like for it to be me, right? But it doesn't necessarily have to be a parent, just that one. And for many people, if you are part of an organization, a youth-serving organization, not to put more into our teachers and our counselors' backpack, but for many students, they are that one trusted adult, and that's a positive. But going back to what else are some positive protective factors that we have that we need in our life? Just, you were talking about today when you got here, you said, I'm running off, not much sleep, right? Is that a protective factor that we need in our life? Is we've got to get enough sleep, right?
Well, I think we need to take better care of ourselves.
Yes.
There are certain disciplines that really help us. You know, eating right, for example,
Yes.
getting enough sleep,
Yes.
exercising. Those are bodily things, but there's also the spiritual disciplines that are very,
Absolutely.
very important. I don't know. I know that I'm a faith-based person today, walking with the Lord,
Right.
but I wasn't always like that. And my ability to cope with things today in His strength are a lot greater than when I was not. You know, then. So I think, Jason, what you said about having a person to talk to is really, really important. A human being that you trust, that actually has gained your trust throughout time, that you know that they're a safe place that you know you could go to and say, look, I'm experiencing this, or this happened to me. Give me some advice. Give me a hug. Tell me what I should do. Don't you think?
Absolutely, absolutely. And being able to, communicate with that person as consistently as possible is nice, right? Because like the teeter-totter, you want to get as much of that good info into your head as possible instead of the negative messages. So
Right.
I know for me, I had to change like the type of music I listened to, even because I already felt bad. I already felt really sad and felt, that I wanted to die. And so the music that I listened to at that time really perpetuated, those thoughts and those, all it did is just reinforce what I was already thinking. The music didn't make me feel that way. I already felt that way, but the negative information and just
Music is powerful. I mean, it can
Absolutely.
actually bring healing. Or, I mean, I know that some kind of rap music, I mean, I don't particularly have a propensity to like it, but that's just me. But there's some very good rap music,
Absolutely.
but some of it, has a lot of angst to it, and it can foster a lot of feelings of rage and violence and stuff.
Yeah,
So
absolutely, and so, and then watching different types of TV shows, so
TV,
I'm
yeah.
very intentional about watching, comedy, stand-up comedy and stuff like that, because especially early in the day, like I love to put something on that is going to influence my mood, and your first interactions of the day have the most power,
Right.
And influence over your day than the next several ones. So if
Absolutely.
you're in control of that,
Yeah.
finding a way to, I listen to just like positive thinking, possibility thinking, anything that's a positive message. It really
And that's
helps to
important
influence.
because we have to have a good narrative with ourselves.
Absolutely.
We have to speak positive over ourselves.
Yes.
It's very important. If we keep spiraling down and speaking negative things in us, our brain is wired to hone into our belief system. So if we believe something, it's going to, no matter what good happens, if we have one bad thing that happens, it's like a domino. It'll suddenly go all the way down and fall flat. And then all of a sudden you're thinking, oh my gosh, you forget about all the wonderful things that you've done and the things that you've experienced that are good, and you hone into this one negative thing. But you guys go and you speak a lot in schools, and I'm sure you
Universities.
see universities. I'm sure you see a lot of kids, young adults that are experiencing trauma. What are some of those experiences that you have seen and deal with?
It really runs the gamut. Sometimes, again, it's that one big event,
Yeah.
or it's cumulative. But I just kind of want to. You said something a minute ago, and this thought came to mind. We think, we feel, and we get to choose our course of action. And I think that especially when you are having those negative thought processes, that you catch it. Like, I am a
Early.
good person. I am worthy of it.
Yes.
And I get to choose
Yes.
what I'm going to do about it. I'm not this hapless creature that just has to accept this negative thought pattern. And it's tough, and it takes
What time.
we want people to understand is that there's no pass go when it comes to recovery. It is not a sprint. It is not a race. It is a series of changes in thoughts and feelings in order to affect change in our behaviors.
Yeah, that is very, very true. And Amy, you were saying that you have a real heart for the young people, and you see how they're suffering a lot. And,
absolutely.
You know, I was talking to my daughter this morning, and she was saying she was thinking going to college, and she said, you know, Mom, I think I might decide to do this online. I said, why? She said, because there's so much shooting going on. And I'm frankly scared to go into a place where somebody who is, you know, unstable mentally will come in and just shoot everybody. That's coming from an 18-year-old. So I can imagine all of that fear that comes up.
Well, and we could go off into lots of different paths on this one. I know that recently, I won't tell you the school district that we're into right now, teaching teen mental health first aid, which is for freshmen through freshmen, sophomore, juniors, and seniors. But so yesterday we were actually in a classroom, and we had the gamut from freshmen all the way through seniors. And one of our topics yesterday, several of our talks, one was bullying. One was about gun violence, because we've got to talk about it.
Yeah, we do.
And the fact that, you know, even this year, one of our school districts is Uvalde CISD. And so obviously we were there before, we were there when it happened, and we're going to be there for years to come and part of their recovery. But the school district isn't very far from there. And so not even them just being down the road from that, we know it affected them whenever it was trauma in their life, right? Even though they weren't at the school, it's that secondary trauma, right? So we know that when school started this year, there was a lot of hesitation, not just from the students, but from the faculty too, right? You know, like your daughter saying, to step back in that door. But to reassure those students that, honestly, we have schools, we have ongoing safety measures to keep those students safe. I will say this, I was at one of our universities, and we're not allowed to come on any university, any entity without saying, are y'all expecting any type of a drill today, a security drill? And if they say no, we say, all right, well then, if there is one today, we're all going to take it seriously. So I don't know your procedures here, so if you have one of those drills, somebody, you know, assign yourself to me and get me out of here. I was actually at one of the universities, and they had one of those drills, and without a blink of an eye, somebody scooped me up and took me to the safe place. It was amazing. So things are being
put
done.
in place.
Yes, ma'am, they are. They're being done. So I want your daughter, and I want others to know, it is rare. I know we're seeing more and more about
this
it.
coming up more to
It
the light,
is,
yeah.
but they are taking you know, top-notch measures to keep our students, you know, safe.
We also empowered the students yesterday, because we said, hey, when you learn to recognize when somebody is struggling, then you are part of the solution. This is what you can do. You can choose to be kind to somebody that you see is struggling, because we never know, you know, sometimes our behavior gets the best of us, and we say or do things that aren't productive or helpful.
Right.
But I think when we see those folks, I think we need to, instead of telling them to stay quiet, go away, how can I help you?
Yeah.
What's going on?
Yeah.
I think those are questions, and really building empathy in those students, I think, can also be an effective means of creating safer environments.
Absolutely.
You know, I was saying earlier on in the show that, Lewis's show, that I read a book years ago called Heart-Shaped Leadership, and it really impacted me because it's leading with the heart. And I think if we teach people, whether they're kids, young adults, if you lead with your heart, you always go to the right place. If you can reach out, part of that is what you're talking. If you can reach out with your heart and say, okay, I'm seeing something that I think is probably off here. Tell me, what is it? Why are you triggering? Can I walk alongside you to help you? What are the symptoms that you're having, like what you were saying?
Yeah. And Jacqueline, what we say is, see something, say something.
I like that.
Don't keep it a secret. See something, say something, right? And so for our teens, their action plan that we teach them is to look for those symptoms, right? And then like yesterday we did the alphabet with them, and we said every one of you are going to pick a letter, and I want you to say what could be a sign or symptom that someone's struggling, right? And they had to go all the way through the alphabet. And then so we want you to look. So once you see it, we have to teach them how to ask. And we even teach them how to ask that question, are you having thoughts of suicide? Are you having thoughts of suicide? Once they ask, we teach them to listen non-judgmentally and believe them. That's a key, is to believe them. Then we also teach them.
Go back there again, because that's really important.
Yes, absolutely. They've got to believe. So many times it's like, oh, you're just being, I know you'll probably receive this too, you're just attention seeking. What did you say last week? They're attention needers, right? You need to get them to the attention to the assistance that they need.
Because that's what you were saying when people were saying that about you. But in all effect, everything that you were doing and thinking was that you were crying out to be loved, basically.
Right. Absolutely.
Because you had a lot of negative things being spoken over you.
Right. Yes, and I always, I try to ask, teachers to think about that. And there's a lot of teachers that do a really great job.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's easy to see that student who sleeps in class all the time, right? Who maybe doesn't looks disheveled or whatever. And the immediate thought is that, they were probably out partying last night. They were probably, they're lazy.
Right.
I remember having, I was just starting to wear contacts, and my eyes were red. And the first thing was,
Absolutely.
It's like, what did you get into last night?
They've been dipping into the drugs.
Right, and so it's possible maybe that student who's sleeping at night is experiencing domestic violence at home, and they can't sleep.
Yes.
Right.
They have to be, they're afraid to sleep.
Yes.
And so imagine going all night, right, without sleep, and then going and sitting all day trying to focus.
Well, I think I had a mental image of a balloon being blown up. And trauma is like that balloon, and people stuff that balloon underwater, and they keep it there, and they keep it there, and it's exhausting to, someone say, how are you doing? Oh, I'm fine. Like, really? I know you're not fine. And so they squash this balloon underwater, and they keep it down till they're exhausted. Something triggers them, and then the balloon bursts, and then they get another balloon, and they push it back down, and it's like a cycle, and it keeps going, and
That's
it keeps
a great
going.
analogy.
It
I'm
keeps
going to
going.
use that if I may in class. I'm going to use that.
I mean,
that's a
so
great analogy.
it's like, but actually what I'm thinking, and I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a therapist, but what, it makes sense to me to take that balloon and slowly take the air out of it. Instead of just bursting the bubble.
Right.
Hence also like a trash can. Can you imagine like crumpled pieces of paper, which are instruments of trauma in our lives, and we crunch this paper and we throw it into a trash can, and obviously it just blows up and it spills over because there's so many pieces of paper that just come out. But instead of that, people are afraid to seek help, maybe because they're thinking, oh no, I can't do that because we have to be strong, we have to be vigilant. Our society and our culture always says that, no, we're winners. We are in it to win. Yeah. And so therefore that mentality, that brainwashing causes you to say, well, if I say I'm not really feeling like a winner today, I'm kind of feeling more like a loser than a winner, but what am I going to do with that? So it causes a different reaction. But I think the concept of what you're saying, asking, see it, and how did you say that?
See something, say something.
See something, say something. We can be little psychologists. We can take, that piece of trauma and just begin to unpack it slowly. Slowly. Instead of dismissing it, but unpack it to where that ball that's spilling out of the bucket then becomes just like a flat piece of paper. It's not crumpled anymore. It's like being ironed out and questions asked and therapy given and someone to mentor you in the process, to where all of that suddenly becomes, instead of crumpled paper, it becomes flat and nice and put in the bucket, and it's all put in order, and then the person can go about their life and live their dreams.
True. And then if something does, by them going out and getting help, remember, just because somebody is in recovery, that doesn't mean that life's going to happen again, right? But the beauty of it is that they've already reached out and received help. So if you reach out again saying, I noticed, I remember a time when you were feeling this way. What did you do?
Yeah.
And reminding them, who did you reach out to? Are they available? Let's go. If they're not available, can we find somebody else, right? I love that. I also love when you said we've got to be thinking more about our heart, because, and I think we are leaps and bounds for making differences in school, because yesterday Teresa was teaching and there was a young man And he just could not keep his eyes open. And it wasn't because she was not teaching a great class. But, some people were like, hey, you need to get up, you need to wake up. So eventually I just made my way over there to him, and I squatted down on the ground, and I put my hand on his leg, and I said, hey, are you okay?
Yeah.
And he said, I don't think so. He said, my throat really hurts. And so what do you think I asked? I said, have you gone to see, I'm in school. I said, have you gone to see a nurse? He said, no, I'm fine. I said, how about let's go and see a nurse today, right? But it's the same thing with mental health. What if I reached out and he said, Ron, I'm just so depressed today? Wouldn't we say, all right, well, let's go see the counselor then today, right?
Yeah.
There are avenues that we can go.
Let's see somebody
rather than
somebody. And I don't know if you saw it, but so we also had the principal of the school in that class, right? And
no pressure, right?
Right. I know. I had to behave myself, which is hard. But at any rate, I noticed at one point the principal, and I saw him sleeping, and I'm not going to judge because the world is full of judgment.
Right.
Is full of saying things like, oh, well, it's a slight against me. And I just want listeners to just think for a moment. When you have that thought, catch it.
Yes.
And choose to feel differently about it, because we didn't know what was going on in this young man's life.
Right.
And it was interesting because before that, I saw the principal, and he was like signaling over to another student to wake him up or to wake up. And I got it. I got where he was coming from. But I hope maybe this example here gets listeners thinking that the next time you see somebody behaving a certain way, don't automatically think that they're there to slight you.
Right.
That it could mean a lot of different things, and we won't know until we say, are you okay?
Because we've really got to love the person. Maybe not what they're doing, but who they are. And we've got to see them in a good light, in a positive light, the way God sees us.
Absolutely.
If we take that position proactively and say, you know what, I may not like them specifically, but God loves them. And that will change our perception about people, and lead with the heart. Lead the way that we would like someone to approach us and deal with us kindly and lovingly, because it's so important.
Yes, yes. There's also, there's a really great, it's just two little captions in some of our curriculum. And so the first one, remember, the way that we perceive something, again, can really set our mood. So in the first little cartoon, it's a young man, and there's a lady walking behind him. She's not saying anything. She's just do-do-do walking by. And in the little bubble, it says, she hates me. She hates me. Right? And so she hadn't even said anything to her. But then the next bubble says, now what about this? Let's take two. She's walking behind, not saying anything, and he says, and she's not saying a word to him, but she says, she doesn't know me yet.
Yeah.
She doesn't know me yet. So think about the way that we perceive things. Again, sets everything. It's, in other words, whenever you text somebody and they don't text you right back,
right,
where does your mind go?
Yeah, they're ignoring me.
Yeah, where does your mind go?
Yeah. And that brings us to, another point we talked about earlier, self-hatred.
Yes.
Trauma can lead to self-hatred, feelings of being inadequate, guilt, low self-esteem, comparison to others, ignoring the good things that have happened to us. We'll never be enough. We'll never say enough. We'll never be good enough.
Right, yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, this negative self-talk, right, is it either playing tapes of things that you've heard other people say about you or to you, or things that we just think that other people
exactly,
are
that tape
us.
that keeps playing off in our mind over and over and over and over and over.
And all it does is just reinforce. I had heard on one of my motivational tapes I used to listen to was Tony Robbins, just so he doesn't think I'm stealing his stuff here. Yeah,
that's better. I can hear you better.
And he talked about like an eraser technique, and it's like a record. And if you play a record, it sounds great, right? But if you start scratching that record, right, you're flipping the script, you're interrupting those voices, what's being said, that message, it starts to lose that power. You're not hearing those words, right? And so really changing the dialogue,
changing the narrative,
right,
it's very important, because we live in language,
yes,
we live in moods, we live in emotions, we live in feelings all the time, every minute of the day. Hence that little example you were giving, the bubbles, the perception. We live in that. We can't ignore that. We're living in that all the time.
Right.
And, that's part of what we talked about earlier, self-care.
Yes.
Being proactive on purpose by giving a good narrative. I don't care if we have to write 10 things about us. We may not feel that we're beautiful. We may not feel that we're intelligent. We may not feel that we're doing a good job. But write it down anyway. And even if we have to force ourselves to stand in front of that mirror, look ourselves in the eye and tell us, you are beautiful.
Absolutely.
Good morning. I love you. That can, in itself, is so powerful. If it's done consistently.
Jacqueline, what I want the listeners to look in the mirror and say, I matter.
Amen.
I matter. You matter. I want to back up a little bit and talk about back on trauma a little bit, and let's talk about how things can spiral out of control.
Yeah.
So in one of our videos, I want you to think about one of our videos. There is a lady, and she's been working for a university for 30 years. You know where I'm going with this. So she's been working there for 30 years, right? So obviously the university loves her. She's a pillar of the community, right? Now, in the video, it's a very old video, and it shows the Twin Towers when 911 hit, right? So I'm going to take you back to that. That was worldwide trauma. Right? Because people were sitting there looking at it over and over and over again. So this lady, the pillar of her community, her family member wasn't in the Twin Towers, was next door at one of the offices next door. But because of that, remember, none of us are exempt from mental health challenges, right? It was that one incident that sent her spiraling down into depression. She was not harmed, but it was that one incident. So let's move on, because thank goodness that she had help, she had support in her life from neighbors and church members that literally paid for her rent, all of her bills for quite some time until she could get back up on her feet.
Right.
But in the duration, because what happened, her depression hit her so hard, she said, death could not be worse. Death could not be worse. She was so down. She said, I felt like I had lead in my feet. She lost her job. Because she couldn't make it to work.
Function.
Now think about even the university, how hard it was to let her go, but they couldn't keep her. So now, thank goodness she had support, and she was able to make it through to get recovery. But what about those that don't have support? Think of what would have happened if nobody reached out. So she lost her job, therefore she couldn't pay her rent, so therefore she lost her apartment. She's living on the street. Who do you think she probably would come in contact with? Law enforcement. I mean, let's just say that she could very much wind up in jail. So if we don't
homeless.
So if we don't reach out and get help, immediately, that was a success story on something that horribly. None of us, this could happen. None of us are exempt from this. It could happen to any of us. But it's so important to have community or know where your resources are in your community, right?
Very important.
Absolutely.
Because, we have coping mechanisms, every single one. Has coping mechanisms. It doesn't matter what age you are, you have coping mechanisms.
Right.
Do you want to discuss some of those coping mechanisms?
And if you don't know, if you don't feel like you have them, then explore things that are of interest to you, right? Pat Deegan is somebody that I love her story. She's amazing and inspires me. And she talks about personal medicine, right? Personal medicine is, I love going to the dog park. I love watching my dog.
I love that, personal medicine. I'm going to steal that. Personal medicine. I make my little potion every day.
Absolutely.
Personal medicine.
Absolutely. I like that too.
So doing things that you enjoy build up good feelings, so it helps you to feel better. And it interrupts that pattern of the negative thinking, and so, when we talk about like with negative self-talk, catch it, check it, change it, right? It's,
say that slower.
Yeah, I was
for
gonna
those
say,
that
say
have
that
not
again.
heard it, they need to hear that.
So catch it, check it, change it. And so for me, like I still, like those thoughts want to come in, you're so stupid, and so I have to catch it.
That is so important. Let's talk about the catching part. Because, I tried to catch a fish once, sneaked up behind it and just said, I'm going to catch you. And then put a net in and I caught it. But that's literally, that's a funny example, but it's actually what you have to do. You have to catch that thought literally in a net.
Right.
Because if you even linger just a little bit on it, then it's going to be slowly growing and growing and growing. And then you'll think, oh, another thought and another thought. Oh,
Yes.
maybe that's not so bad. Oh, maybe
Right.
I should do this. And maybe I should do that. Well, what about this? You have to catch it right at that moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of times, thoughts will just pop into your head.
Yeah.
And it's not mine until I start to own it, until I start agreeing with
That
it.
is so true. It's not yours until you own it.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
that's what so many people call like mental strongholds. Because in the beginning, it probably isn't that way. But the minute you believe it and you own it, you become it.
Right. Absolutely. And, I've heard this analogy of, your mind is like a bank. And so if you keep putting negative thoughts in,
Yes.
what are you going to be able to withdraw?
Absolutely.
Yes.
You're only going to have negative stuff
Yes.
in there. And
Yes.
so, as part of your, personal medicine could be the positive
Personal medicine is in our book now. I do too. I'm putting that in my pocket. I love that.
We should make T-shirts, personal medicine, and on the back we write point 1, go for a walk. Point 2, for
That's
me,
right.
read your
Yeah.
scripture. Point 3, pray, or go
Right.
seek a friend, or eat.
Whatever it is
Snuggle with your
that
puppy.
you
Sleep.
love to do.
Whatever
Absolutely.
that is.
Yeah.
You-
Absolutely. So the second part, right? So we got catch it, right? I caught the thought, and then check it. Am I really stupid, or do I really?
Right.
What's the reality
Yeah.
of it?
What's the reality
Yeah.
of that? Is that
and
true?
where is that thought coming from?
Right. And what's so just recently, I had thoughts of, and I was going through a really rough time, and I was like, I hate my life, and I'm like, well, Jason, I was like, do I? And so I had to kind of check it, do I really hate my life? And I'm like, well, no, I don't like what I'm doing with
There
my
you
life
go.
right now, and that is a very different conversation. right?
Very,
That is a
very different.
Well
and
said.
so language is so.
This
so
is what I'm saying. We
powerful.
live
Right.
in language.
Yes.
Language to one another. Language on this show today. Dialogue. And language with ourselves. Our narrative. The things that we say to ourselves about ourselves.
Yeah,
Daily.
absolutely. Yeah.
I agree.
So I
What
checked-
what we were telling the kids yesterday was, hey, your words have the power to heal somebody, but most certainly they also have the power to hurt people.
Absolutely.
And it goes back to that bullying and how it transcends throughout a person's lifetime and what it causes them, unfortunately, putting into that mental bank, that negativity, and it's hard to overcome, but there are ways to do it.
And we
Like-
make sure and let them know also that, and those that are listening right now, I want you to think about maybe when you were young, maybe you were bullied. Bullying has lasting consequences.
Oh, I'm telling you, I was bullied
Lasting
because I had a big,
consequences.
long Greek name nobody could
Well,
pronounce.
see, you still remember it. But for
And I'm
some,
sure it's beautiful
I
and
laugh
lovely.
about it now.
But for some, remember, we always let them know that if you don't deal with the trauma in your life young, remember, it becomes layers. I love your balloon. It's going
absolutely.
to eventually pop.
Yeah,
I
it
love
will.
that. I use a dynamite stick, so I'm going to use your balloon. But I do. I use
We'll
a
trade.
dynamite stick. But remember, it has lasting consequences. So if you have been bullied, even if you're a listener today and you're an adult and you've been bullied, talk to somebody about it. And here's the thing. I want you to think if you've been bullied in your life and you just keep playing it over and over, almost like you're in a jail cell and you keep hearing it.
Yeah.
Well, I want you to look in your pocket today and reach down in there and realize, oh my goodness, this whole time I had the key in my pocket this whole time. Reach in there, unlock it, and get yourself out. You own the key.
You're going to use that wisdom key. And you're going to
Yes.
say something to replace that
Yes.
negative thought.
That's
the concept
right.
of replacement.
You own it. That's
Yes.
right.
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I think that people have to be proactive about that. They do make that list. So everyone that's watching, do make that list for yourself. Do make that list. If you were going to oppose yourself, what would you say about yourself?
Right.
Write those things down and then counteract every single one of those things. I had that when I first became a Christian. I remember the Lord saying to me, if you were the devil, what would you say? And what would be
Wow.
the hiccups and the problems that you would put into your life? What would be your weaknesses? And he said, write them down. So early on, I wrote that list down, and that caused me to be very sensitive. Oh, I know why I'm experiencing this today. I know why that is in my life right now. I know why I'm being tempted in this direction, for example.
Absolutely. Well, in a minute, I want to go to Teresa and talk about
Yeah.
non-suicidal self-injury. But before I go there, I wanted to say something about what you just said. Because we're going to take a little Christian detour for a moment, if I
Yes.
may. Because every single day, remember, the devil knows your weaknesses. And so every single day where those weaknesses, he's going to go after those, right? Which is exactly what you were saying. What were your weaknesses? And so he knows he's going to go after that, right? So we have to also say, I realize he's going after this just because it's my weakness, right? Absolutely. We have to defend ourselves from that. But Teresa, I wanted to talk and put it over to her to talk about sometimes people who have trauma in their life, they turn to non-suicidal self-injury. So Teresa, what is that?
Yes, and I was going to go
Yeah,
there, so
what
let's
is
talk
that?
about that a little
So
bit.
non-suicidal self-injury is some sort of, and it is a wide variety.
Oh, it is. It's huge.
Wide variety of things that people will do to themselves.
But
in
give
an
us some
effort-
examples for the listeners.
or in an effort to cause harm to the body without the intention to die.
Right.
And it most commonly, and especially among young people tend to be the demographic that engages most. But there are adults that do engage, and it can evolve over time. Most commonly, when we think about non-suicidal self-injury, we think of things like cuts,
Yes.
burns,
Yes.
causing bruising, pulling hair out, causing any kind of scarification. Those are the common ones.
Or food disorders, anorexia, bulimia, all
Perhaps
of those
using-
things.
Perhaps
Yeah.
using food. But there are other things I think people don't necessarily equate with non-suicidal self-injury that we want to bring attention to are things like misusing and overdosing on medications, and
Yes.
especially when it's mixed with alcohol.
Yes.
I mean, unfortunately, we have far too many examples of folks who've lost their lives, unfortunately, to non-suicidal self-injury. They didn't. I don't truly believe. I don't know if y'all remember the actor Heath Ledger. He's probably one of the more recent folks. I don't believe he wanted to die. I don't think that was his intention. I think that whatever he was going through in his life at that time, unfortunately, he used substances at that moment, and that cost him his life. One that is also so nefarious and sometimes subtle, and people don't necessarily equate it with non-suicidal self-injury, it's allowing yourself to be in abusive situations.
Yes. Let's talk about that a little bit, because that is so, I hear it so many times and I see it so many times. I've been in it. So I understand.
Especially our youth.
Yeah, so whether it's a romantic relationship, but I think especially with young people, and when they get in, if they decide to go into college or even in the workforce, where there's groups of people that want to quote unquote say that they're their friends, but only if you do this for me, or will be exploitative, or just verbally and emotionally abusive. I mean, we've heard of some terrible examples in life where we've seen people just being bullied as adults. You know, we think of bullying as only being a adolescent issue. No.
Well, everything that we're talking and we're referring to young people, but that's the same for adults.
Absolutely.
It doesn't matter if you're a young person or an
Correct.
adult. You're going to experience trauma. Trauma is not gender specific or
Exactly.
age related.
That's right.
It's
Not
the
at all.
same right through the board.
Not at all. But when you think about people who unfortunately fall into a situation where they are being treated poorly and abused, I've done some work with domestic violence survivors, and most often the common thing that they would express to me was that in some form or fashion they believed that they deserved it. And
Yeah, I've
it's
heard that too.
heartbreaking.
Yes.
But I can also see where that line of thinking might come from, especially going back to what Jason was saying. If your thoughts are telling you
Right.
you're not valuable,
Exactly.
that you aren't worthy of good things, you aren't worthy of love, well, then we become prime candidates for those types of situations.
Absolutely. I see it all the time, and it is exactly like you said, absolutely heartbreaking.
Well, I want to say something. I'm going to let Jason take this one, but I want to ask a question, and I want the listeners to think about this. I'm going to say it twice because I think I'm going to shock you. Can non-suicidal self-injury be a good thing? You're like, what did she just say? Let me say it again.
Slowly.
Can non-suicidal self-injury be a good thing? Think about that. And then Jason, I'll hand it off to you, and I'm going to let you explain that to him.
Yeah, that always gets a lot of interesting reactions to that one. So yes, actually, it can be, and it's not the. So it can be a coping skill, right?
Yeah.
It can be something, and it's not the one that we recommend.
No.
Right? But somebody who is doing participating. So I used to cut on my arms a lot. I would cut messages into my arms.
Oh wow.
And because I was feeling at that point where I was at the end, and I just couldn't deal with. And so the physical cutting for me helped me to feel a physical pain rather than an emotional pain.
Right.
And so it was like, to me, the way I would think about it is like, you have a bottle of Coke, right? And you're shaking it up. Well, if it all came open at one time, right, it would splatter everywhere. So for me, that behavior helped to release that pressure that was building up very, very slowly in a way that I didn't take the next step, because I was afraid that it was going to go farther,
Right.
further, that I was
Right.
going to attempt on my own life. And so it can be. And so that's why judging.
But if we catch it early, that's the thing. Someone that's anorexic or doesn't eat because they have a bad self-image, and you see it in a lot of young people, but it's, again, in adults too.
Absolutely.
Well, it's what we tell people.
Yeah.
It's the words we put out there to people that in order to be successful, to be well-liked, you have to look a certain way. You have to have certain things. And that mindset is so damaging and devastating.
It is. It's very bad.
We also need to understand that, remember, sometimes those that are participating in non-suicidal self-injury, the reason it can be a good thing, even though it's an unhealthy coping skill, we don't necessarily want to take away the unhealthy coping skill until we can replace it with a healthy coping skill, because it may be the only thing. They may be sacrificing a part of the body to save the whole body to suicide. So I'm sacrificing a part of my body instead of taking my whole body, which is what he was saying. So, example, if you're sitting there going, what are you talking about? So I like to tell teachers that if you imagine in a classroom, you're taking a test, and maybe the student is really stresses out over testing, right? To the point that their anxiety has gotten the best of them and that they had started participating. But in class today, I see Jason, he's taking a test, and as he's studying and listening, he's got a rubber band on his arm, and he's answering the questions, I always like to say, please don't find a time to, go and ask about that rubber band after the test, right?
Yeah.
And then maybe afterwards, so it could go two ways, and this is why we don't assume. So I could say, hey, Jason, so after class today, I just have a quick question. Could you stop by my desk? Sure, right? He comes by my desk, and I say, I noticed that when you were taking the test today, there was a rubber band on your arm and you were snapping it. Now, he may say, I just found it in the hallway, and that's when you're like, Jason, give me the rubber band, right? But he may open up and say, well, yes, ma'am. So, whenever my anxiety gets the best of me, I've been cutting, but I've been seeing an amazing therapist or whoever my person that's been assisting me, right? And so I no longer cut. And so we've taken away the cutting, and now whenever I get so stressed out, I just snap. So that is an example of taking, again, we don't want to necessarily take away a negative coping skill until we can place it with a more positive. And that was one of those examples.
If we can catch it in time,
yes,
for sure.
Absolutely. And letting them know that, first of all, there is alternatives, right? Because remember, at any time, even though a small cut can become an emergency just like that. I mean, it can become a 911 call just like that. So to understand. And then here's the other thing. Are they attention seekers, which is that horrible word that they get labeled? They're just attention seeking. Jason, say it again. It's worthy of saying. They're not attention seeking. What are they?
Right, they're in need of attention.
Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
Attention needers.
Yeah.
And if somebody goes to those extremes,
Yeah.
then we should definitely give them that attention.
And I think it's
Absolutely.
great that we're getting the word out more and more so that we are in the schools, in the community. We're talking about it. We're
Yes.
talking about it.
We
Some
want everybody
Exactly.
trained. After Damar Hamlin had the cardiac arrest on the football field, now American Heart Association, man, they got the best plug ever. You can't buy that kind of marketing, right?
Right.
Well, what is it going to take for us to get that kind of marketing to get everybody trained in mental health first aid?
Yeah.
I mean, we don't want a community, any community, Kerrville, Texas, the U.S., the world, anybody to lose their battle to those internal struggles unnecessarily, especially if we can teach people, hey, this is what it looks like. This is what it might sound like. These are some of the behaviors to be aware of. How do we help you have a conversation with someone so we can be preventative, we can be proactive rather than reactive and waiting for the next shoe to drop?
Yeah.
But I can also hear your listeners right now that are so frustrated. They're like, there's such a backlog in getting help right now. And it's true. So let's be honest here. We're going to be honest on your show, really honest, and say, but there is also programs out there like our mental health first aid programs that really help families while they're waiting. Even though help is available, they may be on a wait list to get into them, but help is available. But while they're waiting to get help, mental health first aid truly can be that interactive, that interim to say, how can I be with that family member and help them until we can get them into that, so the help that they need and
the
deserve.
next step.
Absolutely.
Right.
So there is tools out there that we can give people.
So for the listeners, where can they go to get some help? You talked about that 988.
Oh, absolutely. 988.
988.
988. So we have 911, we have 988. 24/7. You can call them. You can text the line if you do not feel comfortable. Yesterday, we did a lot of pretending what we were saying and texting, say, okay, I know all of y'all feel more comfortable texting. So we gave them literally a situation that said, what would you do, right? And so we're texting each other. You can text 988, and there is trained professionals that will talk to you. Even if you were with Jason and maybe he's the one struggling, you're like, I don't know what to do. You can call the 988 number and they will assist you with that loved one or that person in your circle that's struggling. They'll help you. They will never judge you. There's no insurance payment. There's no cost. I just want people to know 24/7, 7 days a week, it's available to them.
That's great.
Yeah, that's awesome. And also if you look online, there's a Google peer support warm line or peer specialist warm lines. And so peer specialists are people who have lived experience with mental health challenges. And so you're able to call these numbers, and they have different hours depending, but you can call and talk to somebody who's maybe experienced some of what you've experienced. They may not have had the same experience, right? We always say we may not bought the same shoes, but we shopped in the same shoe store.
We all need shoes.
Right?
Yes,
So,
I like that.
We've got some similar experiences.
that.
But don't you think, Teresa, that for someone to really get help, they want to really need it? In other words, they have to want to get better.
The most important part of recovery is willing participation. It's willing participation, and there's a lot of help out there. But you have to know that it's not going to be a quick journey. It's not going to be a quick fix. It's going to take some work.
And I'm concerned about people. I know several people that, adults now, who are into the coping mechanisms of alcohol, and they can't get out. They never started off as alcoholic, but they became, or they're on the journey to becoming one, and the narratives are so negative about their lives, and they want to get better, they say. However, the steps are not taken to get better. And so how do you deal with that?
Substance use addiction is what people need to understand about it is, and it's hard. I will be very, very honest with you all that it has taken me a long time to accept that, as I grew up with a family member in my household that had addiction, and I suffered trauma because of that. And it was very hard for me to hear the words self-medicated and truly understand what that meant. And it wasn't until I got into my career that I finally understood it. What happens when people become addicted to a substance is there are fundamental changes that are happening in their brain and in their body. So it's not so much that how they got there was, a various winding road, right? And that's where we need to act, right? Once, unfortunately, they get to that destination, we have to really support them and understand that it is going to be a lengthy process in changing those behaviors.
And so how do you walk with a person that is in that situation? Because I think that if we don't catch them that early, but we find them at a different stage, what is the best thing that we can do?
Whatever stage they're at, we always encourage them to get the professional help, because they can't. It's not when a person gets to the point of addiction, they can't just stop on their own. That's not even feasible.
Right.
So we always encourage them to get that professional help. We do everything to support that, and we don't engage in those negative coping skills with them. But it's also important as a caregiver, as someone who supports somebody with addiction, is to also set some healthy boundaries for yourself as well.
Well, that's very important. I'm glad you talked about that. Otherwise, they can become a toxic person to your life.
Exactly. And you can fall victim, unfortunately, because it then becomes a traumatic experience for you.
Right. And one thing, excuse me, I'd love to say, especially to our healthcare providers, right, our mental health providers, is, so I heard a statement once, from a crisis worker that, it just gets hard working with people who refuse to get better. And so I shared with that person, I've had over 25 hospitalizations. I wasn't refusing to get better. I was struggling to get better. I wanted it. I just didn't know how to accept it. And a lot of that came back to my core beliefs of that I wasn't worth it. I wasn't valuable. And so reminding people that, if somebody comes through your, whatever it is they're experiencing, right, and then they, have a setback, I don't really care for the word relapse, right? I think we all have setbacks in life, right?
We do.
And so,
but we make comebacks,
right? And so
that's right.
Yeah, and so so if somebody comes through your crisis center or whatever it is, and you have to intervene, and then they do okay for a little while, and then they're back in 2 weeks. That doesn't mean that the first intervention was unsuccessful.
That's right.
If they came back, that means it's successful because they're still here to be able to come back.
And they're coming back to you. I think our definition of success, especially for a person seeking recovery, has to change from what we expect in the medical model. Yes. We have to understand that success will look different. But the underlying message I hope all listeners really took away from this episode was recovery is possible.
Yeah.
I also, just falling back on what Jason said, I think we live in a society that we want results now. We want
very
everything.
microwavable society.
And so, I like that word too, but I also think it's very important, especially if you're caring for someone who is struggling with a mental health or substance use challenge. It is a journey. So we have to have I hope some of the listeners out there today remember who Mary Poppins is, right? Mary Poppins said, you must take a spoonful of what every day? Sugar, right?
Makes the medicine go down.
That's right.
Medicine go down.
But caring for someone who is struggling with a mental health or substance use challenge, it's not a spoonful of sugar. It is literally a shovel of patience. Or even more, that you've got to have a shovel of patience.
That's so good.
And so knowing that it is a journey, they're going to have some steps back, but I love that they're going to come back. But then I also, to those who are caring, it's really important that you understand you cannot do more than they're willing to do for themselves, right?
Well, that is really important. That is so important. That comes back to what I said. They have to want to get better.
Yes.
It's a gray area because, like you said, Jason, in your life, it wasn't that you didn't want to, but you were struggling to get better. And then you have to ask yourself, like, as one who is a caregiver, how much do you put in? Maybe you don't do the whole journey. You get recruits and say, look, I can only deal with this much, but I need somebody to help me to care for that person because otherwise it's traumatic to the caregiver.
Yes, and there's also some other things that they need to think about. And everybody, unfortunately, wants to tell you how to fix yourself, right? And so instead of saying, well, here's just what you need to do, Jason, we've got to, I like to say, assist them with their action plan. Assist them. Do you like somebody telling you what to do? Probably not, right? but you're more apt to buy into a recovery, whatever that is going to look like, your recovery journey, when you say, all right, so what do you think? What is our step? What do we need to take? And I'm willing to go with you, right? But what do you feel? And now if they come up with something that is like off the wall, then we come back and say, okay, well, let's do the pros and cons of that. If we did do that, what would happen? They're like, yeah, they wouldn't work.
So in other words, try to talk to them about some form of an action plan
that they come
that's
up
reasonable
with. Yes.
and not unreasonable.
Well,
And
and
it
we
may
do that
not
when
be.
what people need to know too is that when we give information to people, it's more than giving them a pamphlet, a phone number,
Right.
a website, but it's also giving people, helping them understand what their options are. Because people who are struggling, all they see is nothingness.
Right. Yeah, and giving people, the ability to options and choices, and then being able to make decisions on their own. That is empowering. And so the more they can do that.
And I think, Jason, you probably would agree that every person is so different. So one size does not fit all.
Absolutely.
This person, you'll have to maybe go an extra mile.
Absolutely.
This person, maybe not so much. And there's tough love involved in that too. There's caring, but there's, like you said, there's boundaries. Where do you do the caring versus the tough love as well?
Well, in something
It
that
requires, I think, a lot of wisdom.
my dear friend Amy, I'm borrowing this from her, and she told me this. She said, I love you, I support you, even though I don't like what you're doing. It hurts me to see you hurting this way.
Right.
I will support what you decide to do. And there's, is that hard for a type A personality like me?
Right.
I hear you.
And
I
others
hear you.
might agree with me too.
I hear you. Thank you so much. It's been a wonderful conversation.
I agree.
I am really hoping, I don't know if we have any questions, but those that have been listening today, if you need any more help, you know to dial 988 for further help and further questions. Those who are caregivers, we love you, we thank you. I think that so many people need you out there. Continue to be a caregiver. Continue to lead with your heart.
Why not let today be the day? It's kind of like at the end of church when they say, come on down, right?
Yeah.
Well, I know some of you may have a sore throat, you've got the flu, you go out and you get help right away because you want to get better.
Right.
Why not let today be the day that you said, I'm tired of feeling this way,
Right.
and take that step, knowing that it's going to be a journey.
Yeah.
But why not let today be that day and feel better and find recovery?
Yeah, because there's hope.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. People can and do recover from this thing we call mental illness.
Yes,
And
yes.
so, and it's the hardest step.
And it's
that
not
first
stigma.
step.
It's
Right.
not stigma.
Right.
It's not stigma.
But 100% of the time, people that refuse to take the first step never take the second step.
Wow. So we leave you with that question. Take the first step.
I agree.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
We love
you.
you.
Thank you,
We love
everybody.
you. We love you.
for talking about the hard topics.